Okay, y'all, I'm gonna come right out and say that if there was ever one singular series that helped to inspire my deep love and continue studying of writing, psychology, and sociology, it's 100% Natsuki Takaya's award-winning psychological shoujo masterpiece, Fruits Basket. I have been waiting literal years to do a proper analysis on this series that, as I mentioned in my latest video on the subs versus dubs debate, now available to watch on North Caesar's IGTV and YouTube, this series genuinely changed and saved my life. It's no small exaggeration to say that my anxiety is pretty much sitting at a whole ass 12 right now because of all of this total self-added pressure I've added upon myself to do this series every delicious drop of justice it deserves. And that goes doubly for the fact that the 2019 English dub is not only literally one of the greatest in recent years, but also one of the many prime examples of the standard we need to be holding English dubbing to. And no, I'm not just saying that because I once had the opportunity of interviewing and fanbying out with Chris Sabat himself. However, and all of that said, in order to ensure that this series gets the time and examination that it so rightfully deserves, I'll be breaking up these videos into different parts to be released periodically down the line in between covering other series. There's just so much about Fruits Basket that I want to discuss and share with all of you, including wanting to do individual profiles on each and every central character, of which there are a lot of. All that said, disclaimer time. The following is a huge content trigger and spoiler warning for this video and its subsequent analysis, including but certainly not limited to psychological, emotional, and physical trauma, abuse, neglect, bullying, suicide, mental and emotional disorders, as well as the very personal things that I choose to share in these videos with proximity to those topics, to make this and every video relatable, in-depth, informative, educational, and entertaining. That said, if discussing the events and the end of the Fruits Basket manga, which will likely spoiler the current anime adaptation, its 2001 incarnation, or if any of the heavier topics that I'll be getting into may possibly trigger you, upset you, or put you in any kind of negative headspace psychologically, emotionally, or yes, even physically for those of us whose bodies react as a result of the former with some kind of physical reaction, i.e. hyperventilation, shaking, coiled tightness of the body, or anything of that nature, then listen, I completely get it, okay? I'm black, autistic, queer, and non-binary, they them pronouns please and thanks, with plenty of past trauma that I myself am still and always will be healing from in some capacity. That said, there's just some shit on the internet you just don't want to have to see or deal with, and when it's randomly shoved in your face like a but could he be Goku ashy head ass, it sucks because you haven't had time to mentally or emotionally prepare yourself or prepare a way to avoid it entirely. I completely respect that your feelings are valid, and fuck anyone else who will tell you otherwise or make you feel lesser for it. That said, I'm giving everyone a 15-second head start to click out of this video, scroll past, or switch apps because I love y'all and genuinely care about y'all's emotional and mental well-being. Let's roll.
If the nigga wanna hit it, make that nigga spend it, make his pockets hurt. Lil' Kello, what's up?
Attention, attention. This ain't for you 9 to 5 niggas or you 9 to 5 bitches. This one right here for all my ratchet ass bitches. This for the
So for today's video, this will just be an introduction to the series, how it impacted me personally, and most importantly, why, especially if you live your day-to-day life as the survivor of some kind of trauma, be it present or past, I cannot encourage you enough to watch this show or read the manga to completion, preferably when you're in a moderately healthy place to absorb and properly process some of the themes and tropes you'll encounter in Fruits Basket, given a lot of what you'll see may possibly mirror or remind you of, if not your own personal trauma, then the trauma of someone you personally know. But please don't let that drive you off from this incredible series, if for no other reason than the fact that Fruits Basket, at its core, is a series about breaking literal generational curses. Holla if you hear me, my melanated peoples. Oh, you know, the real generational curses. The ones that we're not allowed to talk about at the dinner table, much less with our own parents. The ones passed down from great-grandparent to grandparent, from parent to child, and so forth. The ones that not only protect the abusers in the family, but offer them a seat at the head of the table year after year after year. The ones that manifest themselves as coping and survival mechanisms, passed down as the cycle repeats. The ones that we ourselves, in some capacity, continue to perpetuate daily. The ones that will always be there, deeply ingrained from literal generations of trauma, pain, and suffering. And the very same ones of whom it falls to many of us, very much like the deeply relatable characters of Fruits Basket, to say to those generational curses, this shit right here, nah, it stops with me. But first, some background on Fruits Basket and why why I cannot emphasize enough that for all of its faults, still remains one of the greatest series, and no, not just of the last 10 or 20 years, but of all time. Fruits Basket, or as it's lovingly known by both Japanese and international fans, Furuba, is a 23-volume manga written and illustrated by beloved mangaka Natsuki Takaya, who has a gift for penning other incredible works that predominantly feature her ability to master the handling of multiple genres in one series, including slice of life, romance, drama, psychological, and the supernatural. The title itself, Fruits Basket, is inspired by the Japanese children's game of the same name, where the children are assigned a particular fruit, let's say an apple or a banana, sit in a circle, and has to wait until the leader calls out the name of the fruit and invites them over to join the titular Fruits Basket. It's a game which is explained within the context of the overall narrative that Toru Honda, one of the series' several central protagonists, played as a child. However, she instead chose her favorite food, onigiri, or rice ball. Her classmates laugh at her, as is often the case, and because, quote, there's no room for a rice ball in a fruits basket, end quote, Toru is left with a painful memory of watching her classmates play without her, all the while waiting for someone to call out for her to join them at last. This brilliantly sets up one of the largest themes of the entire series, as Toru, later in life, would once again be the rice ball amongst the fruits basket that is the Soma family, very much in the same way that her future husband and baby daddy, Kyo, is the metaphorical rice ball of the Soma family, but for very different reasons. In 2001, Fruits Basket was picked up for what would be its first animated adaptation, spanning 26 episodes that more or less went the way of Fullmetal Alchemist versus Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, in that the Fruits Basket manga was initially incomplete and wouldn't be finished running its course for 5 more years. Enter Stage Right, the beautifully remastered 2019 adaptation that dropped 18 years after its original anime debut and 21 years after its 1998 serialization debut in the semi-monthly shoujo magazine Hanato Yume, published by the company Hakusensha. On the surface, Fruits Basket initially appears to be your standard Cinderella mixed with Beauty and the Beast elements of shoujo fantasy story about a homeless, hapless heroine whose problems are all magically solved and subsequently begin when she's taken in by a rich but very mysterious family. But that, my friends, is just the superficial tip of this incredibly complex iceberg. It's at this point we're introduced to our lead cinnamon roll, Toru Honda, a 16-year-old first-year high school student, whom, following the loss of her father to pneumonia and later the death of her mother in a tragic and in the manga graphically depicted car accident, not wanting to be a burden on her aging grandfather or 2 best friends, Uo and Hana, takes it upon herself to live in the woods in a tent, with little more than her treasured picture of her mother Kyoko, her school books, school and work uniform, and a couple of other small necessities, such as a towel that she'll use to dry herself off with after bathing in the river. And I'm just gonna take a moment to say that while her living situation is at first played for laughs, as someone who grew up without a stable home from my earliest years, separated from my parents and sister, bounced around between relatives and strangers alike, and who would later, as an adult, experience exactly what it was like to have to rely on homeless shelters, sleeping outside, showering with water hoses, starvation, and doing whatever it took to survive another day. Toru's situation resonated in a deeply personal way with not only myself, but anyone else who has experienced true homelessness and the traumatic loss of your entire family. Toru becoming orphaned and homeless is depicted in graphic detail. However, and most importantly on the basis of it just being good, effective writing, we also see the long-lasting psychological and physical tolls that this and other moments within the story take on Toru in mind-breaking and vivid detail. The reason I say that this is both effective and important writing is that as a writer, I can't help but notice that many forms of media, whenever the protagonist or any of the characters experience a whole-ass tragedy, more often than not, and imaginably for the sake of time constraint, often aren't shown working through said tragedy. And we as the audience typically see that they've either resolved and or probably and unhealthily compartmentalized a lifetime's worth of trauma just in time to be full of pep and step for next week's episode. On a day-to-day basis, Toru is commuting from the woods to attend school and often works many nights after class to help her pay for her tuition and make ends meet. She is determined, although it might be more accurate at times to say desperately anxious to earn her high school diploma. Reason being that her graduating high school was one of the last promises that she and her mother, a grade school graduate in her own right, shared between them, with Toru herself remaining internally hyper aware to the point of anxiety of the fact that her mother worked very hard when she was alive to give Toru the life she deserved. However, more on their complex relationship a bit later. One morning, as Toru exits her tent and heads to school, she happens to notice a quaint little house hidden away in the forest. As she approaches the house, she is surprised and delighted to see little hand-painted models of the 12 animals of the Chinese zodiac: the rat, ox, dog, rooster, snake, dragon, monkey, boar, horse, rabbit, tiger, and ram. After being found by the owner of the house, aka Shigure Soma, the two strike up a friendly conversation, and Toru notices that Shigure, like many others, didn't include a model of the cat, the unofficial 13th member who is said to represent the leap year. She recounts the old story her mother told her as a child, and the same one that's persisted for hundreds if not thousands of years. One night, God held a banquet and invited the animals of the land. However, the rat told the cat that the banquet would be held the day after, causing the cat to miss the banquet, and subsequently the chance to become a true member of the Chinese zodiac, which in turn led to the cat being shunned by the other animals of the zodiac, and the cat bearing a deep grudge against the rat. At least, this is how the story is told. But if I don't get around to explaining the real story in this video, believe me, I'll cover it more in depth in future ones down the line. Toru then tells Shigure that ever since she'd first heard that story, she was 100% dedicated to supporting the poor cat, going so far as to declare herself the year of the cat, despite being born in the year of the dog. Shigure, ever the fine-ass smug bastard that he is, wonders aloud about how an unnamed he would feel to have a fan. He quickly changes the topic by deploying his usual criminal brand of sexual harassment, only to be stopped by his cousin and the quote-unquote prince of Toru's high school, Yuki Soma. That very same night, as Toru is returning home from work, she's spotted exiting her tent by Yuki and Shigure. Poverty. Hilarious. After explaining her situation to them back at the house, and following a massive landslide that buries her tent and belongings, Toru collapses from a fever. When she awakes the next morning, she's shocked to see all of her belongings safe and sound, courtesy of Yuki and let's say some of his friends. But more so than that, Shigure and Yuki offer her a place to stay, free of charge, provided she be their housekeeper, which, to be fair, they are in desperate need of. She graciously accepts the offer. But as she's being shown to her room, the roof collapses and in drops 5 feet and 7 inches of Rage with tangerine-colored hair, who is looking for some pretty boy ass to beat. And wow, that sounded terrible. You know what? Let me just real quick. Has come to challenge Yuki to a fight. But oh no, a conveniently placed piece of debris causes Toru to trip and fall onto Kyo, transforming him into a cat. Justifiably concerned, she opts out for the perfectly reasonable reaction of losing her shit, right up until another piece of plot pusher decks her on the head, causing her to fall against Shigure and Yuki, who then transform into a dog and rat respectively. TLDR, and for the sake of time constraints, Toru learns that certain members of the Soma family are cursed to turn into one of the 12 members of the Chinese zodiac, including the cat, when they're hugged by a member of the opposite sex or their bodies come under a great deal of stress, such as being psychologically traumatized or becoming ill. There are some exceptions to this rule, namely that if two members of the zodiac but still of the opposite sex hug, they don't transform. As a result of this rule and from time in infinitum of the Soma family, many members of the zodiac often date, marry, and procreate amongst themselves, despite being direct cousins, as is the case with many of the Somas, or in some way collectively related to the main or side branches of the Soma family. And I'm certainly not going to judge them, because in the context of literally not being able to procreate with someone without turning into some kind of animal, which I am so sure leaves plenty of room for some very interesting implications, and in keeping a very, very important generational and family secret hidden from the world, at least it makes sense. Over the course of the series, we're gradually introduced to the other 12 members of the Zodiac, the cruel and mysterious head of the family meant to represent God in the old legend, Akido, of whom it is no small exaggeration to say is the literal embodiment of the phrase, to put the fear of God into, and eventually we bear witness to not only the repercussions of the curse's hold over the Soma family, but as a result, how hundreds or even thousands of years of trauma left unacknowledged, unaddressed, and unresolved can and will infect future generations down the line, which can be firmly argued as the true curse of the Soma family and Fruits Basket as a whole. Everything about this series is meant to subvert the tropes and themes we're so used to seeing in not only shoujo and josei manga, but also various other genres that span the mediums of book, print, digital, and animation, as well as other forms of media we consume. Case in point, Toru is initially portrayed as the stereotypical happy-go-lucky, perpetually optimistic protagonist that always lands on her feet no matter what kind of horrible things have happened in her life. However, upon closer inspection of her character's true natures, yes, plural, we're shown that what we see on the surface is all a very, very carefully crafted coping mechanism and survival tactic, but nonetheless still very real aspect of her personality. One that was in fact created in her earliest formative years, none other than as a way to cope with the extended period of time where Kyoko, her mother, slipped into a state of full-blown psychological catatonia by the death of her husband and Toru's father, Katsuya, to the point of Kyoko coming dangerously close close to attempting suicide and horribly neglecting Toru for literal weeks, if not months on end, to the point of not being able to remember when her 4 or 5-year-old child last ate. And while this in itself is what helps Kyoko turn her life around a second time, the effects that had on Toru stayed with her for the rest of her life, despite both Kyoko and Toru respectively eventually achieving their own true happy endings in their lives. Toru's story is all the more heartbreaking when you learn that she develops a compulsion-driven coping mechanism and survival mechanic that sees her consciously emulate everything she can remember about her late father, especially his overly polite speech, linguistic patterns, his mannerisms, his self-sacrificing selflessness, anything she can absorb into her own personality to, yes, primarily help ease her mother's pain and make it feel as though Katsuya were still with them, but also to extinguish any whisper of a chance of being abandoned once more by Kyoko, Katsuya perceivably with his passing, her grandfather, or anyone else ever again. To make matters worse for this poor girl, we also learned that she literally blames herself daily for her mother's death, of which she had literally no control over. However, this guilt stems from Toru not telling her mother the morning of the accident, "Be safe," an almost sacred morning ritual that Toru and her mother shared. No cap, this was legitimately the reason I got into the habit decades ago of saying "be safe" to loved ones and even random people. It's also yet another element of Toru's narrative that I or anyone else who have felt the emotional, psychological, and very physical fallout from being incredibly close in proximity to the tragic death of a loved one, the negative effects of which, when not directly addressed, and even with proper therapy and support, can stay with you for the rest of your life. I understand that level of guilt. When I was 16, I lost my grandmother to suicide by overdose. There are so many people out there, myself included, whom unfortunately know the pain of not being able to comprehend or understand a loved one's suffering, be it because you're too young or because of the constant misinformation and non-information your family will feed you about them, and especially not being able to do anything about it, as in the case of Kyo's mother, who committed suicide right in front of him, and in the case of Kyo himself, who watched Toru's mother die but was unable to do anything to save her from fear of revealing his curse. Damn, y'all, I know I said that I relate most to Toru, but the truth is, especially in regards to this aspect of the narrative, I can relate heavily and equally to Kyo, Hattori, Momiji, Rin, or literally any other character in this story. Yes, even the quote-unquote worst of them, like Akito and Kyo's father. Truly, it's just another testimony to how well written and developed these characters are, that readers can see and identify themselves in, for better or for worse, every single character you come across in Fruits Basket. Okay, y'all, I think this is where I'm gonna end the video for now. Not because it's getting too heavy for me or anything, thank you sincerely for worrying, but because all throughout the writing of this script, I've been thinking of the best way to discuss this series, its characters as a whole, and all of the writing and Jungian psychology techniques that Natsuki Takaya utilized to make Fruits Basket the true work of art that it is, without overloading you with too much information in one sitting. Which is why you can definitely count this video as the first in a series on Fruits Basket, specifically its characters, and how almost each and every one of them were able to acknowledge, work through, and begin healing from the Soma family curses, both the Chinese zodiac and the unaddressed and unresolved trauma. First up, Toru's parents. But until that drops, you can look forward to even more amazing reviews and analyses of other series right here on BGA. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Black Girls Anime for more relatable, in-depth, informative, educational, and entertaining reviews and analyses of your favorite anime, manga, video games, and more.